Well, Rebecca Pearson is a model and writer and joins me now to discuss this. Good evening to you, Rebecca. Are you surprised by the statistics?
Sadly, I'm not at all surprised because since 2005, as we've seen, the amount of time that these teenagers are spending online has doubled. And if we think about what they're doing, it's constant communication with their friends, trying to keep on top of all the things that are going on, and then looking on the social medias of other celebrities or other friends, which really are every bit as airbrushed as the magazines and advertisements we often see.
So the airbrushing, let's take a look at that. Body image worries are a major factor here, aren't they? And they are more of a struggle now than ever before.
Well, yeah, I think Instagram and platforms like that are meant to be a kind of realistic, quite candid, behind-the-scenes look at people's lives, but they're very curated and they're not actually realistic. So
you only have to look at Kim Kardashian and how many times she takes a selfie before she posts it. No, I mean, she freely admits that. And the number of filters that people can put on things.
It's not very realistic, but it's portrayed as something that these girls should perhaps be aspiring towards looking like in their everyday life.
What about the social media? I mean, when I was at school, you were with your friends at school all day. You got home. If you wanted to talk to your friends, you didn't have email, we didn't have text messaging, we didn't have Facebook. You either phoned them up or you had to go around and see them or write a letter. So there was an element of parental control that was there and could be exercised.
And perhaps communication with your parents too, because I think when there's constantly a phone under the table beeping at dinner, it's hard to really engage with perhaps what you're feeling scared about that day or you're worried about, because you're thinking, I've got to keep on top of the conversations on my phone and the notifications.
So there's an element of not wanting to be left out that you've got to keep up. Also, we've heard a lot, haven't we, about online bullying, and there is a degree of that that's taking place behind closed doors. It's anonymous, and also for parents very hard to track that, particularly when we have a younger generation who are far more tech savvy than their parents in the majority.
Well, if you think about, bullying has always been a dreadful thing, but perhaps there was a bit of separation between being bullied at school and then maybe coming home, and there was some solace in being at home. But cyberbullying can be by complete anonymous strangers, and it can be by the people you've been at school with all day. And I'm sure it can feel very hard to escape and almost quite hard to relate that to people of an older generation who might not completely understand that feeling.
This survey also looks at class. It's middle-class girls, those with parents with degrees, who are most at risk here. I mean, is this about pushy parenting? Is it peer pressure? Is it a wish to achieve certain expectations?
I'd say that's definitely a factor, and if you also look at the economic climate that these girls and boys are growing up in, it's really scary out there. The world seems really scary. Job prospects aren't looking very great, and getting on the housing market, even though that seems far in the future, it's still there as a worry. And so that fear of achieving in the first place, but then what are you necessarily achieving for, might lead to a feeling of futility and anxiety and depression.
You mentioned boys there. 37% of the girls surveyed had 3 or more symptoms of psychological distress, compared to 15% of boys. Why is it that girls are more susceptible than teenage boys, for example?
It could be relating back to the body image issue. I'm sure that's a factor for boys, but if you look at the kind of onus that's placed on celebrities and their figures in magazines, and then that feeds into Instagram and comparing yourself to what you see on Instagram stars in their bikinis on beaches, perhaps there's that constant comparison to quite an unattainable appearance that's been face-tuned and airbrushed and isn't really possible to achieve.
The former mental health czar Natasha Devon was on Sky News earlier saying that social media, rather than being a cause of the problem, is just a reflection of what is going on in society. And she cited the school curriculum changes as a major factor in this, that subject changes sport, music, arts, etc., which have been squeezed, that they can have a positive effect on mental health, and that actually the academic pressures are getting far greater. I mean, you talked about job prospects and getting on the housing ladder, but that immediate school and academic pressure, how great is that?
Well, that's enormous. I can clearly remember the pressure as a teenager. But if you think about the more creative subjects, they don't necessarily help you become a fantastic economist, but they might help you express yourself and speak more clearly and maybe talk about what's on your mind more. So if those are being diminished, then there's less of an outlet. And so all that focus on perhaps more academic courses and subjects, that's putting a lot of pressure.
How much support is there out there? I mean, and are girls, although more susceptible and more affected by this, are they more willing to seek help than boys might be?
I'm not sure if they're more willing to seek help, but I would say that as a society, we do encourage girls to speak more, to talk more about their feelings, so which could also be reflected in the statistics. I guess there are online resources where there weren't before that girls can perhaps speak to one another or seek professional help.
Okay. Rebecca Pearson, thank you very much for your thoughts.
Thanks.